When God begins to move you, it is rarely loud or dramatic. It often begins as a quiet unease, a subtle shift in the way your heart responds to people and places. And here is the surprising truth. The first sign of who's meant to go with you is not in their words, but in how your spirit feels when they are near. Some will leave not because they are bad people, but because your new direction no longer feeds the bond that once held you together. If you resist this truth, you will carry unnecessary weight. But if you accept it, you will walk lighter, freer, and closer to where you are meant to be. When a shift begins within you, it rarely announces itself with fanfare. More often, it arrives like the slow turning of a season. The air feels different, your pace changes, and what once brought comfort now stirs a strange restlessness. This is how movement begins. Before circumstances change, before opportunities appear, before new paths reveal themselves, your energy changes. It is the first signal, and it comes quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize that the way you see and feel about the world is no longer the same. You find yourself drawn to different conversations, different environments, even different silences. This is not coincidence. It is the evidence that something larger than your own will is pulling you forward. Many people underestimate how much this internal transformation influences relationships. We are taught to believe connections are held together by history, by shared memories, or by loyalty, but in truth, they are sustained by alignment, emotional, mental, and spiritual. When your inner state shifts, the alignment you once had with certain people may no longer exist. And here is where it becomes complicated. The human heart often clings to familiarity, even when that familiarity is quietly suffocating growth. If you've ever wondered why some friendships, relationships, or partnerships suddenly feel heavier, this is often the reason. Your inner energy has begun to vibrate at a different frequency, and those who cannot match it will start to feel distant, even if they are physically present. I remember speaking to a woman who described this very feeling. She had been in the same social circle for over a decade. They met every weekend, shared laughs, exchanged life updates, and supported each other through hard times. But after a particularly deep personal retreat, she returned home feeling out of place among them. The jokes that once made her laugh felt shallow. The conversations seemed repetitive. She didn't judge them. She simply realized she was no longer the same person who had left for that retreat. At first, she tried to force the old comfort to return, but it didn't. Eventually, she learned that her shift wasn't a rejection of her friends. It was a reflection of the fact that her soul was being moved toward new terrain. This is where emotional awareness becomes essential. When your energy changes, you begin to notice who responds to that change with curiosity, encouragement, and mutual growth, and who responds with resistance or withdrawal, not because they are unkind, but because they are no longer in rhythm with you. This rhythm is not something you can fake. It's either there or it's not. And when it's gone, every interaction begins to feel like swimming upstream. The beauty of this inner shift is that it acts as a filter. Without confrontation, without accusation, without forcing anything, life naturally begins to reveal the people who are aligned with your next chapter. You won't have to chase them or convince them. Their presence will feel lighter. Their conversations will nourish you, and their energy will feel like a place of rest. On the other hand, those who are not meant to go with you will begin to fade. Not always by choice, but by necessity. Sometimes they leave suddenly. Other times they remain physically present, but emotionally absent. In either case, the shift has already occurred. What you feel in your spirit will eventually show itself in the reality of your relationships. It is important to understand that this process is not about superiority or inferiority. It's about resonance. Imagine tuning a radio. When you change the station, the old frequency doesn't stop existing, but you can no longer hear it clearly. You are now connected to something else. People who can adjust their frequency with you will remain. Those who cannot will drift away, not out of malice, but because the signal no longer matches. There is a certain calmness that comes when you stop trying to pull everyone into your new season. You realize that divine movement is not a group activity, it's a personal journey. Those who are meant to walk beside you will recognize the shift without you needing to explain it. They will not guilt you for changing, they will celebrate it. And you will know them by the way they make your new energy feel seen, not suppressed. But here's the paradox: as you shift, some people will feel uncomfortable simply because your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. It's not that they dislike you, they dislike the reflection of themselves they see in your transformation. This is where discernment becomes critical. You must recognize when someone's resistance is not a call to slow down for them, but a sign that you are not responsible for carrying them forward. Your movement is meant to inspire, not to drag. And then comes the moment when you notice the sign, the unmistakable indicator of who is truly meant to go with you. It doesn't come through declarations of loyalty or long speeches about commitment. It comes through the quiet, consistent evidence of emotional reciprocity. When you are in their presence, your energy feels replenished rather than depleted. When you share your vision, they lean in, not to criticize, but to understand. When you face challenges, they offer solutions or silent support, not excuses. It is a subtle but unmistakable pattern. They give as much as they take, and sometimes more. This sign is not always easy to see because our hearts want to believe that history equals loyalty. But history is only proof of where you have been together, not of where you can go. The people meant for your future will invest in your well-being without keeping score, because their bond with you is rooted in shared purpose, not personal benefit. If you are moving forward and someone continually pulls your focus backward, they may love the person you were, but not the person you are becoming. I once heard the story of a man who began a journey to climb a mountain. Along the way, he met many fellow travelers. Some walked with him for a mile, some for several days. But as the path became steeper, many decided to stop and rest, while he felt the pull to keep going. At first, he tried to convince them to come along, but eventually he realized that every minute spent persuading them was a minute he was not climbing. The ones who were truly meant to reach the summit with him never needed convincing. They simply adjusted their pace and kept moving. This is the essence of knowing who is meant to go with you. They move not because you ask, but because they are aligned with the journey itself. When you recognize this sign, you begin to walk differently. You stop pouring energy into proving your worth or explaining your calling. You understand that real alignment cannot be forced, and that those who are meant to go with you will not be threatened by your growth. They will be fueled by it. This awareness changes the way you relate to people. You no longer feel the need to grip tightly out of fear. You hold relationships with open hands, allowing those who are aligned to stay and those who are not to leave without bitterness. It is in this openness that true companionship emerges. Not everyone will pass the test of reciprocity. Some will be present only when it is convenient. Others will quietly step back when your path requires more depth than they are willing to give. But those who remain will prove their place not through grand gestures, but through steady presence. In their company, your spirit feels lighter. In their absence, you do not feel abandoned, because their commitment is not tied to physical proximity. It is rooted in mutual respect and shared vision. This is why the sign matters so much. It spares you the heartache of carrying relationships that cannot survive your transformation. It frees you to invest deeply in the ones that can. And it allows you to move with the quiet confidence that as your energy shifts, so too will the people around you, revealing, without force or conflict, exactly who is meant to walk with you into the next chapter of your life. There comes a moment in every season of change when the truth can no longer hide itself. For a long time, you may feel subtle signals, small differences in your conversations, the way your body feels in certain environments, or the way your spirit reacts to certain people. But eventually, clarity arrives, and with it, one undeniable sign. You start to clearly see who is pouring into you and who is silently draining you. This is the point where emotional reciprocity becomes the measure, whether you acknowledge it consciously or not. In relationships, we are often taught to value loyalty, shared history, or the appearance of closeness above all else. But there is a deeper currency, one that determines whether a connection can truly sustain you in the long run. That currency is the mutual exchange of emotional energy. When a connection is balanced, you leave interactions feeling nourished, respected, and seen. When it is unbalanced, you leave feeling depleted, unheard, or strangely small. This isn't about keeping score. It's about whether the connection itself allows both people to grow, or whether it subtly erodes one person's strength to feed the other's comfort. Some people give without hesitation. They notice when you are struggling and offer help without waiting for you to ask. They celebrate your victories without competing with you. They listen with full presence, not as a courtesy, but because they genuinely value what you carry inside. Others take without even realizing they are doing it. They drain your emotional energy by demanding your constant availability, by making every conversation about their needs, or by reacting with indifference when you share something meaningful. At first, you might excuse it, believing it's just a temporary imbalance. But when God is moving you into a higher place of awareness, that imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Imagine a candle. When two candles are lit side by side, they can light each other without either flame growing weaker. But if one is unlit and continually depends on the other for light without ever holding a spark of its own, eventually the lit candle begins to burn out. This is what emotional imbalance feels like. It's not an immediate collapse, but a slow dimming of your light until you start to wonder why joy feels harder to access than it used to. The shift happens when you start to notice the patterns. Maybe it's the friend who only calls when they need something, but disappears when you need support. Maybe it's the partner who always expects you to be the one who makes peace after an argument, regardless of who caused the conflict. Or maybe it's the family member who responds to your dreams with discouragement, not because they want to protect you, but because they cannot see beyond their own limitations. These patterns don't always scream at you. They whisper over and over until you finally hear them. I once met a man who described a turning point in his life. For years, he surrounded himself with people he had known since childhood. They shared countless memories and had been through difficult seasons together. But as he began pursuing personal growth, reading more, changing his habits, and exploring new career opportunities, he noticed something. Every time he shared an achievement, there was an awkward silence. Every time he spoke of his vision, they changed the subject or made a sarcastic remark. At first, he tried to shrink his excitement so they wouldn't feel left behind. But eventually, he realized that love without support is a slow poison. Their presence in his life was no longer feeding his spirit. it was suffocating it. Emotional reciprocity is not about perfection. No relationship can be perfectly balanced every day. There will be seasons when one person carries more, and seasons when the other steps in to hold the weight. But over time, there must be a pattern of mutual care. If one person is always the giver and the other always the taker, resentment begins to grow, even if unspoken. And resentment is a silent killer of connection. The sign that reveals who is meant to go with you is simply when you leave their presence. Do you feel lighter or heavier? This one question can pierce through years of confusion. Lightness does not mean every interaction is joyful. Life brings hardship, and deep relationships include moments of shared pain. But even in those moments, lightness comes from knowing that you are not carrying the burden alone, that the other person is walking beside you rather than standing on top of you. This is not always easy to accept. Some of the people who drain you will be those you love most. They may not be intentionally harmful. They may simply lack the capacity to meet you where you are going. The danger lies in assuming that because they have been with you in the past, they are automatically equipped to journey with you into the future. History is a comfort, but it is not a guarantee of alignment. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer is to release someone from a role they are no longer meant to play in your life. When you begin to honor this truth, something shifts inside you. You no longer chase after people who show you indifference. You stop explaining your vision to those committed to misunderstanding it. You no longer give out of obligation to those who take without gratitude. Instead, you start to notice the ones who pour into you naturally. The friend who texts just to check in, not because they need anything. The partner who listens without rushing to fix, simply holding space for you to speak. The colleague who celebrates your ideas and contributes their own to help them grow. These are the people whose presence strengthens you rather than drains you, whose energy adds to yours instead of depleting it. A woman once told me about a simple but life-changing decision she made. She began to write down how she felt after every meaningful interaction she had in a day. She didn't analyze it at first, just recorded it. After a month, she reviewed her notes and saw a pattern. There were 3 people in her life whose presence consistently left her feeling lighter, more focused, and more hopeful. And there were several others whose presence consistently left her anxious, confused, or emotionally exhausted. She didn't cut everyone off overnight, but she began to shift her time and energy toward the first group. Slowly, she found herself feeling more at peace, more creative, and more confident in her direction. Her outer world began to change because her inner circle began to change. The challenge is that seeing this sign often demands courage. It's easier to ignore emotional imbalances because acknowledging them may require difficult choices. You might have to limit contact with someone you've known for years. You might have to walk away from a relationship you once thought was permanent. You might have to face the discomfort of being alone for a while so you can make space for those who are truly meant to be with you. But what is the alternative? To keep carrying people who weigh down your spirit until you no longer recognize the person you were meant to become. This is why awareness is so powerful. When you understand that emotional reciprocity is not a luxury, but a necessity, you start to protect it the way you would protect your physical health. You would not eat food that slowly poisoned your body, yet many people allow relationships to quietly poison their spirit. The effects are similar: fatigue, loss of clarity, diminished strength. But when you surround yourself with those who nourish you, the opposite happens. You find yourself more energized, more focused, more capable of facing life's challenges. And here is where the sign becomes undeniable. The people who are meant to go with you will not require you to shrink to fit their comfort. They will meet you at your new level of awareness, even if it challenges them. They will not see your growth as a threat, but as an invitation to grow alongside you. They will offer not only emotional support, but also the kind of encouragement that makes you want to keep moving forward, even on difficult days. They will notice when your light flickers and will shield it from the wind until it burns brightly again. Those who are not meant to go with you will do the opposite. They will question your every step, not out of genuine concern, but out of discomfort. They will withhold support until you prove yourself over and over again. They will leave you feeling like you are asking too much simply by wanting mutual care. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The difference between those who pour into you and those who drain you becomes as clear as day and night. And when that clarity comes, you will know that the season of discernment has begun. And with it, the quiet sorting of who is truly aligned with where you are going. There is a quiet strength in being able to release someone without bitterness. It is a strength not born from indifference, but from a deep understanding of life's natural seasons. People enter our lives for reasons, for lessons, for moments of shared purpose, and sometimes only for a stretch of the journey. Yet, when that stretch comes to an end, most of us struggle to accept it. We grasp tightly to the familiar, even when it weighs us down. We replay memories, we overthink words, we create stories in our minds to justify holding on. But growth requires room. And when you are carrying people who no longer align with your path, you are carrying weight that slows your steps. Letting go without bitterness means choosing emotional discipline over emotional reaction. It means understanding that not every departure is a betrayal and not every ending is a failure. Sometimes it is simply the result of two paths that were once parallel, now taking different directions. This is easier to understand in theory than to practice, because the heart often resists logic. We tell ourselves, if I just explain more, they'll see my point. If I just try harder, things will return to how they used to be. But in truth, when the alignment is gone, no amount of effort can recreate it. All it can do is delay the inevitable, making the eventual separation more painful. I remember a woman sharing her story after a long-term friendship ended. She and her friend had been inseparable in their younger years. They traveled together, stood beside each other through losses, and shared every milestone. But over time, their values shifted. One began focusing on personal growth, setting boundaries, and making healthier choices, while the other remained in old patterns of self-sabotage and drama. Eventually, their conversations became strained. The friendship that once felt like home began to feel like a constant negotiation. When she finally chose to step back, it wasn't because she stopped caring. It was because she realized that staying in the relationship required her to abandon her own growth. She decided she could love her friend from a distance. That choice freed her from resentment because she wasn't walking away in anger. She was walking away in peace. The ability to do this comes from seeing relationships not as possessions, but as living exchanges. When the exchange becomes one-sided, when it stops fostering mutual respect and growth, holding on out of guilt or fear doesn't preserve the connection. It erodes it. Releasing someone with grace allows both people to find where they truly belong without the invisible chains of resentment binding them. This does not mean you have to pretend the loss doesn't hurt. You can acknowledge the grief while still protecting your own inner peace. Emotional discipline in letting go requires a certain clarity about your own worth. If you believe that your value depends on someone's presence in your life, you will tolerate far more imbalance than you should. You will convince yourself that the discomfort is temporary or that you owe them more than you owe yourself. But when you understand that your worth is not negotiable, you stop begging for what should come naturally in a healthy connection. You stop chasing after those who cannot meet you where you are. You begin to see that love, friendship, and loyalty that must be constantly demanded are not real. They are forms of dependency dressed up as devotion. One of the greatest dangers in holding on too long is the way it clouds your vision. You can become so focused on what you are losing that you cannot see what is trying to enter your life. Letting go creates space, not just in your schedule or your home, but in your spirit. That space can feel uncomfortable at first because it exposes you to silence, to the absence of familiar voices. But in that silence, you hear yourself more clearly. You begin to notice your own needs, your own thoughts, your own dreams that may have been muted by the noise of a relationship that no longer served you. A man once told me about the years he spent trying to keep a relationship alive after it had long since withered. They had shared so much history that he felt ending it would mean throwing away everything they had built. So he kept trying, apologizing for things that weren't his fault, rearranging his life to keep her happy, ignoring his own instincts when they told him the connection was gone. It wasn't until she decided to end things that he realized how much of himself he had given away in the process. The moment she left, there was pain, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. The constant tension was gone. The pressure to fix what couldn't be fixed was gone. He wished he had learned sooner that letting go can be an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. Releasing without bitterness also requires you to refuse the temptation of rewriting the story to make someone the villain. This is where many people lose their peace. They convince themselves that the only way to feel better about a loss is to see the other person as cruel, ungrateful, or toxic in every way. But this is not truth. It is a coping mechanism. If you must destroy someone's image in your mind to justify letting them go, you are still tethered to them by the energy of resentment. True release means you can acknowledge the good they brought into your life without denying the reality that your paths have diverged. You can bless them as they go, even if the blessing is silent and given from afar. This perspective often comes from understanding that everyone is moving through life according to their own level of awareness. Just as you are changing, others are too, but not always in the same direction or at the same speed. What feels like a personal rejection may simply be a sign that your inner seasons are no longer in sync. It is no one's fault. It is simply the truth of growth. Trying to drag someone into your new season before they are ready will only exhaust you and breed resentment in them. And staying in their season after you have outgrown it will only stunt your own evolution. There is also a deeper truth. People cannot give what they do not have. If someone cannot meet you with kindness, love, or understanding, it may be because they have not yet cultivated those qualities within themselves. You can offer compassion for where they are without accepting their limitations as your own. This is where discernment meets self-respect. You can choose to release them without the poison of anger because you understand that their inability to walk with you is not a reflection of your worth, but of their capacity. When you practice letting go in this way, you stop being bound by fear. Fear tells you that if you release someone, you will end up alone. Fear tells you that endings mean failure. But when you look closely, you realize that releasing someone often frees both of you. It allows them to find spaces where they can thrive without feeling they must change to stay in your life. And it allows you to step fully into the next stage of your own growth. This is not just about romantic relationships. It applies to friendships, family ties, and professional connections. The principle is the same when the alignment is gone. Holding on out of habit only prolongs mutual frustration. It takes courage to do this. It takes an inner steadiness that can withstand the waves of doubt and loneliness that may come after the release. But courage grows each time you choose peace over the illusion of control. And over time, you begin to see that letting go without bitterness is not just a skill. It is a way of honoring both yourself and the other person. It is the quiet acknowledgement that while your journeys together were meaningful, the road now leads you in different directions, and that is okay. Sometimes in relationships, the most dangerous enemy is not a third person, not distance, not even incompatibility. It is the slow erosion of respect through neglect, pride, or unspoken resentment. Respect is the silent glue that holds a bond together, and when it begins to weaken, even the strongest feelings of love can start to fade. People often believe that if someone loves them, respect will automatically follow. But love without respect is like a tree without roots. It might stand for a while, but the first strong wind will topple it. A relationship may survive arguments, disagreements, and even periods of emotional disconnection, but once respect is gone, rebuilding becomes a steep uphill climb. It is essential to understand that respect is not something demanded. It is something inspired. You cannot force someone to treat you with honor. You must embody the qualities that naturally earn it. This means holding firm to your values, even when it would be easier to compromise them for temporary peace or approval. Too many people, in fear of losing someone, let their boundaries dissolve like sugar in water. They believe that endless tolerance will make the other person stay, when in reality, it often makes the other person lose interest or take advantage. Paradoxically, the more you cling without standards, the faster someone drifts away. In any relationship, the way you allow someone to treat you sets the unspoken standard for how they will continue to treat you. If you let disrespect slide once, you've taught them that your tolerance is higher than your self-worth. And here lies the truth. People rarely rise to meet higher expectations unless they are required to. The moment you allow a pattern of dismissiveness, avoidance, or belittling to become normal, it's like opening the door for weeds to take over your garden. The flowers of mutual respect will wither because they cannot thrive in the shade of neglect. Consider the story of a woman who once stood by her partner through years of hardship. She encouraged him when his business failed, supported him financially until he got back on his feet, and forgave his moments of insensitivity because she believed in his potential. But over time, her sacrifices became expected rather than appreciated. He began speaking to her in a dismissive tone, rolling his eyes when she voiced her needs. She told herself, "He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it." But each time she excused his behavior without addressing it, she trained him to believe that her feelings were secondary. By the time she found her voice and demanded respect, the habit of disrespect had already taken deep root. It's important to understand that respect is not simply about politeness or surface level kindness. It's about recognizing the worth of another person in thought, word, and action. It is the choice to treat someone's heart with care, even when you are frustrated, tired, or upset. Respect in a relationship shows up in the little things: listening without interrupting, valuing opinions even when you disagree, keeping promises even when it's inconvenient, and never using vulnerability as a weapon. When those small acts vanish, the foundation begins to crack quietly until one day the whole structure feels unstable. There's a powerful lesson in the way ancient craftsmen built temples. They would choose the strongest stones for the base, not because they were the most beautiful, but because they could bear the most weight. Respect is that foundational stone in a relationship. It may not always feel romantic or exciting, but without it, everything built above will eventually collapse. Love is the beauty of the temple, but respect is its strength. You need both. Unfortunately, many relationships stumble when one person begins to confuse familiarity with permission. The closer people become, the more tempted they are to relax their discipline in how they treat each other. They speak more bluntly, sometimes harshly, forgetting that love doesn't make someone immune to being hurt. Familiarity should breed deeper care, not careless treatment. The couples who last decades are not the ones who avoid conflict, but the ones who refuse to let everyday life dull their respect. They remember that their partner's heart is not a territory they own, but a trust they've been given. Respect also demands honesty, but not the kind that cuts just to be right. It's the kind that speaks truth with the intention of building, not breaking. You can disagree with someone and still treat them with dignity. You can express frustration without using words as weapons. In fact, a mark of a mature relationship is the ability to have heated discussions without crossing the line into disrespect. Disagreement handled respectfully can deepen connection because it shows that love does not vanish when opinions collide. Some people worry that setting boundaries will make them seem cold or unloving, but in reality, boundaries are proof of self-respect, and self-respect is one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess. When you demonstrate that you have limits, clear lines of what you will and will not tolerate, you give the other person a chance to rise to those standards. Without boundaries, love becomes blurry, and one person's needs inevitably drown under the other's demands. One of the greatest tragedies in relationships is when someone realizes too late that they've trained their partner to take them for granted. They look back and see all the moments they should have spoken up, all the times they laughed off hurtful comments or brushed aside unmet promises. But this regret can be avoided by learning early that silence in the face of disrespect is not peace. It's surrender. Peace is only real when it is mutual. A man once said, "Treat people as they are, and they will remain as they are. Treat them as they could be, and they will become what they should be." In relationships, this means speaking to the potential in the other person while refusing to excuse their harmful patterns. It's not about nagging or controlling. It's about holding space for growth while protecting your own dignity. Real respect flourishes when both people are committed to it. It's not enough for one person to hold the standard. Both must guard the atmosphere of the relationship. This is why early patterns matter so much. The way you start sets the tone for the journey. If you begin with clarity, kindness, and consistency, you build a rhythm that becomes second nature. But if you start by swallowing your truth or overlooking behaviors that hurt you, you risk establishing a rhythm of imbalance that will be hard to change later. The truth is, respect is tested most in moments of power imbalance. When one person has the upper hand, financially, emotionally, socially, how they treat the other reveals the true depth of their regard. If someone respects you only when they need you, but disregards you when they feel secure, their respect was never genuine. You can measure the authenticity of someone's respect not when they're dependent on you, but when they could easily ignore you. Respect also has an inward dimension. You cannot expect someone to treat you better than you treat yourself. If you constantly put yourself down, dismiss your own opinions, or tolerate what wounds you, you're showing the other person that your worth is negotiable. When you speak of yourself with confidence, prioritize your well-being, and make decisions that align with your values, you silently communicate, "This is how I expect to be treated." In relationships, you teach people how to treat you not by lectures, but by the way you live. Your example speaks louder than your requests. If you are punctual, they learn to value your time. If you listen deeply, they learn to listen in return. If you honor your word, they feel the weight of theirs. Respect begets respect, but it must start somewhere, and it often starts with you. Would you like me to now expand key point 6 in the same style and flow so the narrative continues seamlessly? There comes a moment in every relationship when silence speaks louder than words. It's not the absence of sound that matters, but the absence of understanding. When two people can no longer hear each other's hearts, it doesn't matter how many words are exchanged. Nothing will land where it needs to. This is why emotional presence is far more important than mere physical presence. You can sit across from someone every day and still feel like you are worlds apart if their mind and heart are somewhere else. Emotional connection is the lifeline of intimacy, and without it, even the strongest looking relationships begin to wither quietly. The challenge is that emotional presence isn't something you can fake. It requires attention, selflessness, and a willingness to step outside your own perspective long enough to truly understand another's. Too many people treat relationships like background music, pleasant when noticed, but easily tuned out when something else captures attention. They don't realize that relationships thrive not because of grand gestures, but because of small, consistent acts of awareness. Noticing the tension in someone's voice, sensing when their smile hides exhaustion, or remembering the little details they thought you'd forget. Consider a couple sitting together in a cafe. One scrolls endlessly on their phone, while the other stares out the window, lost in thought. No arguments are happening, no raised voices, yet a quiet erosion is taking place. They may still tell themselves they're together, but the reality is they are only sharing space, not connection. This is where many relationships die, not in explosive fights, but in the slow decay of unacknowledged distance. Emotional presence is about more than being in the same room. It's about being tuned into the same frequency. It's a discipline, almost a form of meditation, where you intentionally set aside distractions to listen with your full self. This isn't just hearing the words, it's hearing the pauses, the tone, and what's left unsaid. It's holding space for someone's fears without rushing to fix them. It's offering a safe place where they don't have to perform or pretend. One of the most powerful gifts you can give to someone you love is the feeling that they are seen, not in a surface-level social media approved way, but deeply, where their emotions feel safe in your presence. People often forget most arguments are not really about the thing being argued over. They're about the feeling of not being valued, heard, or understood. A forgotten anniversary hurts not only because of the date itself, but because it signals a lack of attention. A dismissive tone doesn't just hurt because of the words, but because it communicates disregard. The truth is, we are all wired to crave connection. Science confirms that emotional neglect can cause as much harm as physical harm. It triggers the same parts of the brain that process pain. That's why emotional absence in relationships can feel like a wound. And yet, many only realize this when the other person begins to withdraw completely. By then, trust has been eroded to the point where even sincere attempts to reconnect are met with skepticism. I once met a woman who told me about the moment she knew her marriage was over. It wasn't during a fight, nor after betrayal. It was when she sat across from her husband at dinner, spoke about something deeply important to her, and realized his eyes had the same look he gave when checking his emails. Distracted, impatient, somewhere else entirely. She finished speaking, and he nodded without asking a single question. She said it was in that moment she felt utterly invisible, as if her presence was optional. That night, nothing changed outwardly, but in her heart a door closed. Emotional presence requires effort because life is full of noise. Work demands, screens, social obligations. But love isn't sustainable if it's treated as an afterthought squeezed into leftover time. People often assume that because they show up physically, their job is done. But showing up physically without showing up emotionally is like watering a plant without sunlight. It may survive for a while, but it will never truly flourish. There's a reason why in moments of crisis, people remember who was fully present. The friend who sat with you in silence after a loss, the partner who held your hand when words failed, the loved one who put their phone away and looked into your eyes when you felt broken. These moments carry more weight than any gift ever could. That's because presence communicates value. It says, "You matter more than my distractions." And presence works both ways. You cannot demand emotional availability if you yourself are guarded or distant. Relationships are mirrors. The more open and attentive you are, the more likely it is that the other person will meet you there. But this openness is risky, and that's what makes it powerful. It requires vulnerability. To be truly present with someone is to let go of control, to stop rehearsing your responses, and to enter their emotional world without the safety net of judgment. Think of it like walking into a garden. You can stand on the path and admire from a distance, or you can step into the soil, feel the textures, and smell the scents. The first is safe but shallow. The second is risky but alive. Emotional presence is the second path. It demands you step into the reality of another person's life with empathy and curiosity. There's a quote that says, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. In relationships, this is gospel truth." When you give someone your undivided attention, you're giving them something you can never get back: time. And how you spend your time is the clearest indicator of what you truly value. If your phone gets more attention than your partner's stories, your actions have already spoken louder than any words you could say. Small habits can protect this emotional connection. Simple things like greeting each other with genuine warmth, asking thoughtful follow-up questions, setting aside specific times with no devices, and practicing active listening are deceptively powerful. They send the message, "I am here, fully, for you." Over time, these moments create a foundation so strong that even storms can't shake it. And yet, many underestimate how quickly that foundation can crack if neglected. A relationship without emotional presence is like a house with invisible termites. On the outside, it looks fine, but inside, the structure is hollowing out. Eventually, something small, a miscommunication, a moment of stress, can cause it to collapse completely. What's beautiful, though, is that emotional presence can be rebuilt even after neglect if both people are willing to re-engage. It starts with humility, the willingness to admit, "I've been distracted, I've been absent," and the courage to ask, "What have I missed? What do you need from me right now?" When this is met with grace instead of resentment, healing becomes possible. But it must be intentional. You cannot stumble into emotional presence. It has to be chosen over and over again, especially when life gets busy. Love is not maintained by default. It thrives under deliberate care. And in a world that constantly pulls our attention in 1,000 directions, choosing to be truly present with someone is one of the most radical and meaningful acts you can offer. There is a moment in every relationship when you realize that true connection is not built on words alone, but on the depth of presence you bring into the other person's life. In a world where so many speak, but so few truly listen, where affection can be given as easily as it can be withdrawn, It is your ability to show up with both steadiness and sincerity that becomes the rarest gift you can offer. This is not about showering someone with endless attention until they feel smothered, nor is it about withholding yourself until they fear your absence. It is about creating a rhythm of presence that communicates without theatrics. I see you, I value you, and I am here, consistently. Many people confuse passion with consistency, thinking that an intense burst of affection in the early days is the same as a sustained foundation of care. But passion without consistency is like a firework, bright for a moment, forgotten by the next night. Real relationships thrive on the quiet, steady flame that continues to burn even when life gets busy, even when the excitement is not at its peak. This is why the moments that seem small, showing up when you promised, remembering something they said in passing weeks ago, making the effort to understand their silences, carry a weight far greater than grand gestures. Think about the person in your life who, even without extravagant words, always makes you feel safe. It could be a friend, a parent, or a partner. They are the ones whose presence is like a steady heartbeat in the background. You may not notice it every second, but you know your life depends on it. That is the kind of presence relationships need, not the kind that overwhelms, but the kind that makes another person breathe a little easier, knowing you will be there when it matters. There's an old proverb that says, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." Relationships are like that tree. The earlier you plant the seeds of reliability and trust, the deeper the roots will grow. And when the storms of misunderstanding or stress come, and they will, those roots keep the relationship grounded. Without them, even the most beautiful flowers will be torn away by the first strong wind. In my travels, I once met an elderly couple who had been married for over 60 years. When I asked them their secret, they didn't talk about grand romantic trips or dramatic declarations of love. Instead, the husband smiled and said, "I made sure she never had to wonder if I'd be there when she needed me. That's it." That's the heart of consistency. Not perfection, but the certainty of presence. He didn't mean he never made mistakes, but that when life got difficult, he did not retreat into silence, pride, or avoidance. His presence was non-negotiable, and that gave his wife the freedom to trust completely. Unfortunately, many people sabotage their relationships by being unpredictable. One day they're overflowing with warmth, the next they're distant without explanation. This emotional whiplash creates insecurity, and insecurity slowly corrodes trust. The mind begins to question, will they still care tomorrow? Will they still be here when things aren't going well? And once that doubt sets in, no amount of temporary affection can fully repair it. Consistency requires discipline, and discipline in relationships is not often spoken about. People talk about love, attraction, chemistry, but discipline is the force that makes love last. It means showing up even when you're tired, listening even when you feel like speaking, and choosing kindness even when you're frustrated. It's easy to be present when you're in a good mood. The real test is staying present when you're not. There is a subtle power in reliability that is often underestimated. When someone knows they can rely on you, they relax into the relationship, their guard comes down. They are more willing to open up, to be vulnerable, to share their fears and dreams. But when someone is unsure of your presence, they start to protect themselves. They hold back pieces of their heart, not because they don't care, but because inconsistency has taught them not to lean too heavily on something that might not be there tomorrow. A young man once told me about his experience growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent. The father provided for the family, worked hard, and never failed to come home at night. But his attention was always somewhere else. The boy learned early that presence is more than being in the same room. It's being engaged, attentive, and emotionally available. That experience stayed with him into adulthood, shaping how he approached his own relationships. He made a conscious decision that when he committed to someone, he would not just be there in body, but in spirit. That choice became the foundation of the deep trust his partner came to rely on. Sometimes people resist being consistent because they fear it will make them predictable. And predictability, they think, will make the relationship boring. But the truth is, the strongest relationships are a balance between stability and surprise. Stability creates safety. Surprise keeps the spark alive. You can be consistent in your presence while still finding ways to delight, to inspire, to bring fresh energy. Consistency doesn't kill excitement. It protects it, because without trust, excitement quickly turns to anxiety. There's also a deeper truth here. Being consistent in relationships is not just for the other person's benefit. It transforms you. It trains you in patience, teaches you to honor your word, and builds your own sense of integrity. Over time, you stop needing to force love to be visible because it becomes part of who you are. The love you give is no longer dependent on your moods, circumstances, or convenience. It flows naturally because you've built the habit of showing up. And showing up doesn't always mean solving problems. Sometimes it means simply sitting next to someone in their pain without trying to fix it. It means standing in the gap when they can't stand on their own. It means lending your steadiness when they feel unsteady. These moments may not look dramatic to the outside world, but they are often the turning points in a relationship's strength. You will notice that the people who leave the deepest impact on your life are rarely the loudest or most flamboyant. They are the ones who stayed, the ones who remembered, the ones who came through when they could have walked away. Consistency is quiet, but it is unforgettable. What makes this even more important is that we live in a time where many relationships fail not because of big betrayals, but because of slow neglect. Love fades when it is not fed. Trust erodes when small promises are broken. Intimacy weakens when presence becomes optional. And because these shifts happen gradually, people often don't realize the relationship is in danger until the distance feels irreversible. If you want a relationship that lasts, commit to being the person who doesn't disappear when things get hard. Be the one who keeps their word even in small things, because small things are never truly small in relationships. When you do this, you communicate a powerful message without needing to say it outright. You matter enough for me to keep showing up over time. The beauty of this approach is that it creates a cycle. Your consistency builds trust. Trust deepens connection. Connection makes both people more willing to invest, and that investment fuels even greater consistency. It is a self-reinforcing pattern that becomes the heartbeat of a lasting love. Life has a way of placing us in moments that test our patience, our faith, and our resilience. The very challenges that once felt like heavy burdens often reveal themselves as the tools that shaped our deepest strength. Every disappointment carried a hidden lesson. Every loss pointed toward a greater gain. And every closed door redirected us toward a path we might never have chosen on our own. It is through these experiences that we learn the value of self, respect, the necessity of boundaries, and the quiet power of walking away from anything that does not honor our worth. When you begin to see yourself not as a victim of circumstances, but as a deliberate creator of your life, you stop asking, "Why me?" and start declaring, "Watch me." You realize that no one's approval defines you, no rejection diminishes you, and no delay can deny you what is meant for you. The journey was never about merely surviving, but about becoming someone who no longer waits for life to hand them opportunities, but boldly creates them. And in that becoming, you discover that the most powerful thing you can ever be is unapologetically yourself.